Living my bucolic life, 3 healthy city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I took them some spin, I drove the horses into the barn, and time to move them out again. Red bars, green pastures, beautiful white houses. The view I see each day when I arrive. This life pleases me, it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.
Hi everybody, this is going to be our last installment of this project. I am so excited for this, I cannot even tell you. It's been good, learned a lot, but ready for it to be over. So today the main thing that I need to get done is get these sleeves inserted, okay? And if you saw the previous video, you remember that there was a big issue that we tried to figure out so we could set them in the way that the instructions say. And I said I'll figure this out later. We're going to start by figuring this out. So the issue here, if you don't remember, is that earlier in the pattern they told us to stitch this down to the seam allowances. And now, later in the pattern, they're telling us that we need to be able to fold the lining completely down, or at least down far enough so we can sew in the sleeve without the lining attached. And so what I'm actually going to be doing is just doing my best to secure a spot a few inches down, right about here. What is that? About 2.5 inches down. And with a matching thread, I'm just going to make a little bar tack across here going into the seam allowance below. And then I'm going to clip the stitching that is securing it to the seam allowance away, just so I can get that out. You know, this far up in the sleeve, no one is going to see, so, you know, I think it's going to be fine. But I'm just clipping this off. And then I will do the same thing on this side and come back up here and clip my little stitches that are holding it secured, okay? But at this point that I made that little tack, it's not going to go any further than that. And then I can at least pull my lining down that far and make it work, okay? And then when it's time, I can pull it back up and just connect it to the bodice up here, and having that much free I think is going to be just fine. So that's my solution. And I might have missed something. I really might have missed something. And sometimes on patterns I do, but you know, you can figure out ways around things. Even if you confuse something, you can usually keep going and you can end up with a garment, okay? But I have had people get extremely upset at me because I may have overlooked one instruction or another along the way. And you know, lighten up. It's home sewing. It's okay. Part of it is the creative processes, coming up with new ways to do things. So don't worry, it will be all right. Okay, so with that one done, and I'm clipping this little seam right there. Now I can pull this down, I believe enough that I can set this into my bodice. All right, so what I need to do now is, you see these little dots here and here, I need to run gathering stitches is what it says. Now I know from past experience when I was trying to gather that little side dart, this stuff does not gather well with traditional gathering stitches. So I'm going to use a different method just because this is so thick. I'm going to use my special a special presser foot that lets you zigzag over a string and then pull that string, and that works for gathering very thick fabrics. So that's what I'm going to use. I'll show it to you, and then we'll work on shaping the sleeve head and then setting it on. Also, while I have these sleeves inside out, I wanted to mention that I did come back and stitch this upper flap to the under, so that's secure up there. I don't think I showed that on camera, but that is done. This is the zipper foot that I'm going to be using. It has a space you can do a zigzag, and through the front there's a little hole right there. Okay, so what I need to do is pull out enough bobbin and needle thread to go at least the distance that I need. So here is my top, and if I go here to here, well, that's technically all I need, but I'm giving myself that much extra too. So here's my foot, and this is the front of the foot here. I have a needle threader pushed through that little hole. I'm going to pull both my bobbin and needle threads through it all the way up and pop it onto the machine. Okay, so now I have these going off to the front here. Put my machine zigzag onto a fairly wide zigzag. I'm going to say a number 4. My stitch length, probably also fairly long. I'm going to set it at 3.5. And I'm going to run this about 1/4 of an inch in. Okay, so I'm holding my threads out, and you do not need to backstitch because you're locking it in with these threads. And just sewing along the edge of my fabric. Okay, so I'm going to pull this out, pull these loose threads off, and clip it. So I don't know if you can see, but it's basically a zigzag that is going over a thread. Alright, so I've got my sleeve. I have my little gathering stitch up here at the top. This is what I have put together to press my sleeve head. It's basically my hot mitt, and you could probably just use a kitchen hot mitt that's clean if you have one, and I just have it wedged up on some bookends, you know, because they're secure. So I just kind of pulled it over the bookends, and it's so it can stand upright like this. And then I'm going to put my sleeve head over the top, and what I want to do is press it so all these gathers are coming together, hopefully with no puckers, and that my sleeve head's going to hold a nice shape at the top. So I'm just draping it over there. Get my gathering threads, I'm going to give those a little pull and cinch that in. And get my steam iron. Press it on. I think it's going to work. Let me turn it over so you can see the back side. Okay, so here I'm trying to mold it over the edge here. Beyond this, it doesn't really need to be pulled in, just on the cap. So while it is hot and steamy and damp, I'm pressing it down. Yeah, that's working really well, really, really well. Okay, so that's it. So now when I take it off, see if you can see, I have a very nice sleeve that I can just go and place into my jacket. So I'm going to go ahead and go do the other one. Alright, do you remember this? Yes, the bodice. So right now, this is what the armholes look like. It has a lining layer and the regular fabric layer. Now here's one thing that's puzzled me about this pattern, and I guess I'll never know. Remember the lining piece for the front bodice, the side front bodice lining piece, was shorter up here at the shoulder, and I kept thinking, oh, they'll give us a reason for it later. It'll make sense later. I think it was a typo. I think it was. Because I'm at the point now where there should be a reason for it, and there's not. It's just a 1/4 inch too short. So it's not going to make a real big deal because it's going to get hid in the seam allowance, but just if you're ever wondering, I don't see a point to it. So right now what I need to do is I'm pinning, I'm pinning the lining to the fabric, and I need to come back and about a 1/4 inch in, hand baste them together. Make sure I'm not bleeding, and I'm not. Hand baste them together all the way around so that these 2 layers will act as one. So I have my little stitches here holding it together that I've done by hand to keep the 2 layers together. Now there's something different that they want you to do, and that is measure down 2 inches from your shoulder seam. You put a little pin here, and then I'm going to measure down another 3 inches from there and put another pin. Okay, so between these 2 pins, actually, so that I don't poke myself while I'm working, I'm going to put a little mark with my heat erasable pin just inside the seam allowance here. Okay, so between these 2 marks, they want you with a hand needle to run back stitches fairly close to the seam line. I'm actually going to, on the lining side, mark where the seam line is so that I have that as a guide while I'm doing it. But they said that the row of back stitches is going to make this stronger and slightly pucker it, which is supposed to give you more room for your shoulder blades to move. So I've never done this before, so we will just go ahead, follow the instructions, and see how it works out. Okay, so I'm in here on the lining side. These are the 2 marks, and I'm just going to draw where that 5/8 inch seam is, which is the same as the width of a measuring tape. So I'm just tracing the outside edge of my measuring tape. So from this point to this point, that's my guideline. I'm going to use thread that matches my fabric, and I'm just going to start at the top and work down. I'm not sure how long of a back stitch they are talking about, so I'm just taking my standard one, which is basically, if this is the end of one stitch, I'm going up about a 1/16 of an inch ahead of it, and then I'm coming back almost to the previous one, so I have a little gap between them. So just like this, it shouldn't take very long. And I do see that it is slightly bunching it, so I think that that is the purpose. The back stitches actually are a little more elastic than a plain machine straight stitch, so that's probably why they say it's better for moving around with your shoulder blade. Just a thought. So let me finish this one, and then I'll do the same thing on the other side. I have just decided that instead of putting the sleeves on right now, what I want to do is come in and finish these buttonholes and sew the buttons on before I put the sleeves on, because I think it'll be easy to maneuver around with this. So what I have is my big utility basting thread on my needle, and on my buttonhole side here, you can kind of see through it where my buttonhole patches are. I'm just going to be roughly basting around here so that I can feel secure that my lining is staying where it needs to while I slice in and work on the buttonholes. And you know what? I'm going to come on this side also, just to make very, very sure that it's all going to be nice. Get to the end. Make one little back stitch just to keep it from flying off, and clip it. I'm going to do the same thing with the other 3 buttonholes. I'm going to start with this buttonhole here. So I'm putting pins, straight pins, down at the farthest part that I can reach in the buttonhole. That's where I'm going to stick them down, straight down through, and those 2 marks are going to mark the ends of my buttonhole on this side. I'm just going to put a little tiny dot so I can see them when I pull my pins out. Okay, now what I need to do is clip that open, and I don't know if you can see, but there's a very faint line that is in between my little welts, because I made these little welts on the back. So I am just going to very carefully cut only through this one little layer of lining up to that dot on this side. Okay, so now my slit is 1/8 of an inch past those marks, and it does seem to give me more room. This layer here is my little welt. My lining is shedding like crazy here. Oh my goodness, already. Okay, this is fiddly, all right? And your lining might not be as tough as mine is. Mine is very, very crisp and very, very secure. Clipping it to 1/8 of an inch beyond definitely helped, because if you can kind of see, I'm able to pull that down. And I'm just going to try to stick a pin there to hold that little lip down while I work on the top. Once I get these just kind of turned under so that the little welt underneath is showing, what I need to do is come back and stitch it, again, by hand, as neatly as possible all the way around so it's very secure. And she shows, I'm going to have to clip some loose threads here, she shows tiny little stitches holding it on. But what she recommends is, instead of doing one circle of stitches that are placed very, very close to each other, she says go through and place them, you know, close but not insanely close, and then come back and do another row and fill in the blanks, basically. So let me get it pinned and I'll show you how I do it. Okay, I hope you can see. Basically, I'm just kind of very carefully shaping it as I go and making little felling stitches. What I found is that when I clipped all the way to the sides, there were a few threads that wanted to come loose a long ways here, okay? And I went ahead and pulled those and clipped them, and that actually made it a lot easier to go ahead and form the opening of the buttonhole, because the stress of those were gone. And so you can see why I want to do this before I do the sleeves, because it's a whole lot of taking a stitch and turning and taking a stitch and turning. And my stitches right now, I don't know if you can see them here, they are probably about 1/8 of an inch apart. And in her drawings, they are even smaller. So I'm doing what she said and coming around again and putting another row of stitches in between the two that I already have, so that by the time I'm done, it's not going to be perfect, I can guarantee that, but they should be about 1/16 of an inch apart all the way around my buttonhole. And I think that's going to hold it securely. But I need to tell you, I think I have a problem, because when I made the buttonholes, I made them to a 7/8 of an inch size. And the buttons that I bought are 5/8 inch buttonholes, but they're very, very fat. And I don't think they're going to fit. So I do have a backup set of another style of buttons. And as soon as I'm done with this one, I will try that out and decide which set I'm going with, and I'll let you know how it goes. Alright, so these are my two options of buttons that will work, and I've tried them both in my functioning buttonhole. This one it's a gold. I've tried a silver one, but silver doesn't work with this. It's too yellowish. So it needs to be a gold tone, and this is just a plain shank button. Plain You know, it's not a super shiny gold, but it's a gold. And then I have these blazer buttons with little crowns on them, very shiny. These are actually the buttons that I used on the other one, the predecessor to this one. And I think I'm going to go with them just because I think that they are shiny enough to dress it up, you know, since I have to take the pearls off. I think that these are nice, but I think that the gold in these, it's too antique. It's too much of an antique gold. And this, because it's so much white and so much pink, it needs something brighter. So that's what I'm going to go with. I will be replacing the buttons on the cuffs with these. You don't need to see me do that because it's the same process. They're just shank buttons. But thankfully, I had enough of these on hands, and you can see it does go through really well. So with the button done, and this is what it looks like on the inside. You don't see any of my hand stitching from when I made the thread button. You just see the, well, you see my hand stitching just going around there, but it's just to hold it open. So I'm going to pull out the basting stitches that I have here, and one of the buttons is done. The other ones I will do exactly the same way. You don't need to watch that. And then once these buttonholes are finished, then I will be sewing the buttons on the front also. Good morning. So I replaced all of the buttons last night, and I put the little crown buttons on, and I actually think it looks a lot better this way than with the pearl ones anyway, so that was very lovely. That was a very good thing. So here is the front of the bodice. All right, got its buttons on. And I almost had a meltdown last night because after I had this all done, I went to my ironing board just to press over the opening on the underside to make sure that, you know, all my marks erased and everything like that. And my iron did that thing where all of a sudden it went and it shot a whole bunch of water out. So I'm getting a new iron. And I was horrified because I was like, oh my gosh, it's going to stain everything. But this morning I came, I looked, no stains, so, you know, that whole process is averted, but I am going to get a new iron. So right now, what I need to do is start setting the sleeves in. There's a few options. They give the hint that if you really wanted to do this precisely, backstitch the whole thing in by hand. And then there's the other option of just pin it in and fly it through the machine. And I think I'm going to kind of pull it halfway. So what I'm going to do is hand baste the sleeves in and make sure that they are positioned correctly. Do some hand back stitching around the bottom where there's going to be a lot of strain. And then I'll take it from there. I was planning on doing the upper part by machine, but we'll see. Once I do the bottom, sometimes I get on a roll and I just want to finish working the rest of the way around, so we'll just see. But anyway, let's get started. But I'm just placing this on here just to get a look of what it's going to look like. So I hope you can hear me. I know that the camera mic isn't as strong as my other one, and lawnmower is going outside. Love him for mowing my lawn. Thank you, husband. So then I can just kind of press and pin these on and get a very good idea of how this sleeve is going to set in. And that's very helpful. Okay, so I'm back here at my table. It's still pinned up here, and I just wanted to show you. So here's my front of my bodice. The front of the sleeve has the buttons. So if you're laying it down, if it's pinned on and you're laying it down and you do not have buttons in the front, your sleeve is backwards. So make sure that you see buttons when you sit down and lay it flat. Okay, so now what I need to do is turn my bodice inside out. Hang on. And since we are able to dislodge the lining from the sleeve for a few inches at least, I'm going to go ahead and pin this together, and I can barely see my little dot. There is a dot right here. I don't really want to mark it, but I will, right here in the center. So you're basically marking the under arm of the bodice is wider than the underarm of the sleeve, but the center matches with the center. Okay, in case you lose your mark, it does. So I'm just going to pin those two together right here, making sure that the edges are level. And we're not dealing with the lining at all. The lining is just kind of tucked in there, all right? And then I'm also going to come up here, and I think my center shoulder came off, but my other two are still attached, so that's okay. Pinning my shoulder seam. So I'm just going to pin this. Now this is very bulky on top, but you know what? I don't mind right now because we don't have shoulder pads, we don't have a sleeve head, we don't have anything to give it substance up on the shoulder. So I'm going to count all this extra bulk in the seam allowance here as kind of doing a dual duty of what a sleeve head would do, if that makes any sense. And what I'm talking about is there's like a strip that you can sew into the seam allowance at the top of a jacket shoulder that kind of gives it a nice shape so that the sleeve's going to want to fall nicely. So anyway, that's what I'm going to consider this to be. Come down, match up my dots, and just try to get everything pinned nicely. So let me get all this pinned up and I'll show you what it looks like. So I have it all pinned on, and there is an amount of easing all the way around you need to work in. But like down here at the bottom, you just push it down and it's going to flatten itself in. So it's going to look like there's a bubble, but once you push it down, it's going to work for you. So I have, pinned securely all around the edges. I got my little piece of old measuring tape that I use for a gauge at 5/8 of an inch, and I just lined that all around the edge, made little dots, so that now I have a stitching line that I can follow. All right, so I am going to use a double strand of my matching thread for this, and what I've decided is that I'm going to backstitch from this point. This is that little backstitch area we did just on the bodice separately here. I'm going to backstitch starting here. I am going to be hand sewing all the way around the sleeve. So I will wax my thread, I will double my thread, and get started right here. So this is the way I'm doing it, and everybody does things a little bit differently, so you find what works best for you, making sure my edges are lined up. Actually, let me put a pin right here. One of the hardest things is there are so many pins here that I keep catching my thread on it. So I'm leaving less than 1/8 of an inch between this one to this one. So if my thread is up, I'm going down about halfway in between, which is a little less than a 1/16, and then coming up again a little, maybe call it 1/8 of an inch from this point, like that. I'm going to pull it through, grab my thread, cinch it. I don't want to pull it at my needle because I am a knotted double strand, and over time that's going to weaken it up by my needle and then it will pop off, and we don't want that. So again, kind of like this, pull it through, grab my thread, cinch it up. Going down halfway, coming up 1/8 of an inch past, grab my thread, cinch it up, just like that, to make a nice little strip of back stitches. So I did back stitch the entire sleeve in, and it wasn't difficult at all. Actually, I just put on a video and had that playing while I did it, and it actually worked really well. I'm pleased with it. I was able to, since I was working by hand, make sure everything was going to be nice and neat. Now, like I said, there is a lot of bulk going on up here, but I have the seam allowance pressed into the sleeve, so it kind of gives a nice little poof right there. Not sticking up poof, but structural poof, if that makes sense, so that when the sleeve comes down, instead of just falling, it's going to want to brace over. So that's kind of nice. So inside right now, I have just I haven't ironed it yet, so my little marks are still there, but I have my back stitching all the way around here. Not sure how to get this camera to focus on that. Sorry about that. And so what I need to do right now is come back here, and in the undersleeve area, you know, still not messing with the lining at all, I need to trim this fairly close to my back stitching. So it says between the notches, and at this point I'm not too sure where my notches are, but they usually fall right about where your sleeve starts to really curve in. Okay, so I'm going to, excuse me, I'm going to assume right here. And at that point, taper it down so that I'm about 1/4 of an inch from my back stitching down here. And I did this very securely with a double wax thread, you know, making sure each stitch was really, really secure. So I'm not really worried about that coming apart. So I'm just going to take my mighty little scissors here, and one layer at a time, because this is fairly thick with all of these seam allowances, trim it down. If you do this and you feel nervous about it, run another row of stitching, and you could do it with the sewing machine just inside of this one, just to give you an extra layer of security. I might go ahead and do that just to make sure that this is not going to want to unravel before it gets here. This extra layer is basically just to keep it from not raveling. So let me get these trimmed on both sides. I'll run that tiny row of stitching right here and show you what that looks like. So this is the underarm. I have trimmed it, and this is my back stitch, and then this is an extra row of stitching that I put in there just to make sure it doesn't want to unravel down to where my back stitching line is. Alrighty, so it's actually very, very secure. I can tug on it pretty hard and nothing is coming loose, so I like that a lot. So now what I need to do is attach the lining. So I'm just going to kind of open up my armhole like this, and I'm going to keep the seam allowances towards the sleeve. And now I'm going to fold my lining under about 5/8 of an inch and find the place where it matches up here. Now this seam is not here, but I can see right now underneath where it is, so right about here should be where this seam matches up. And at this point, it's just to pin it just beyond that stitching line where we did the back stitching, so that we can come in here and put felling stitches down to hold it. So the same thing here. So if this is my seam, then at this point right here is where I need to put this seam. All right. So I'm gonna get an extra thread off my hand, fold this under, and place it just beyond that. Okay, so I just kind of been placing it here, and what I can tell you is, at least from my experience, I'm folding it under probably between 1/4 inch and 3/8 of an inch, and that seems to be working a lot better than doing a full 5/8 of an inch, just because there's a little bit of extra room and spacing here with all of the fullness, and I don't want my lining to be so tight that it might cinch it up a little bit. I don't even know if that's possible because of all of the quilting, but just to be safe, it just seems like it's working pretty well that way. So once I have all of this from here all the way around pinned really securely, then I am lifting up the sleeve at this point. Just going to stick a pin through her to hold her up there, and trying my best just to put a couple key points down here. Okay, then I can take the whole thing off and go back to my chair and just sit there and flat fell or put felling stitches all the way around just to secure it really carefully. So as I'm coming around the bottom with my needle, this is what my felling stitches look like up here. You know, they're not perfect, there are some puckers, but that's to be expected because the sleeve was not gathered, was not eased, and it is a slightly different size. at this point because I'm using a smaller fold than the seam allowance on the main. But, you know, it's allowed. Basically, little bitty puckers and folds are allowed. So I'm just kind of catching slightly more of the lining fabric than the space I have gone through and pulling it in. And that's working it in as I go. So underneath, I pinned it under and I didn't actually see that I needed to clip it at all. You know, every fabric's different and you might. But I didn't have to clip it, so I'm just pressing it under, and I'm going to finish felling stitch it all the way around and then do the other sleeve, obviously. Okay, so it's all sewed in on both sleeves, and from the outside it looks really nice. So close to being done. The final step is putting in the chain. So the chain is beautiful, but it also acts as a weight to hold this down. And I just have a gold tone, obviously not real gold chain, but it is heavy enough that I think it will do that. So my chain is going to go all the way across the bottom, and I'm going to try to make sure it doesn't get twisted. I'm going to start over here, right about, I'd say less than an inch from the finished edge, all right, because I kind of want it to weigh down that corner. So I'm going to put it, the tip of it, half an inch in, I will say. Now, when you're sewing it on, I'm pretty much going to sew each link in here where the links kind of overlay. That's where I'm going to put my stitches, so they'll be visible, but they won't be obvious, if that makes sense. And also when you sew it, she says, don't make it completely, you know, taut, but loosen it up a little bit and let some of that ease lay in between the links so that while the jacket moves, the chain has some flexibility to move too. And my chain is a few inches longer than the entire jacket, so I think that it should be okay. I'm going to go ahead and just pin it in the center back just to make sure I don't get totally off course while I'm doing my easing. And I'm just going to take my time and hand stitch this on. I am going to be putting it so that it's going to hang, and the bottom of my chain is going to be about 1/4 inch above the finished edge, just like that. So I'm just putting the last link on. I decided to end my chain just before the buttonholes over here because I thought that it would be way too difficult to use that buttonhole if there was a chain right underneath it. So I think that that will work out because if it is completely closed, the front one will overlap at this point. So there you go. There is one more thing I want to do to this suit, and that is I am going to sew a few buttons that match the ones that I put on here on the front of that skirt. So if you remember way back when we were making this skirt, it has this wrap part here, but it's sewed to this point. And I'm concerned that when she walks, it's going to be obvious that this is a spot here where it's sewed, okay? So what I'm going to do is at this point, I'm going to put a button, and I think I'm going to put 3 of them like that going up the skirt. And I really like the look of that, and I think it'll tie it together with the jacket. So you don't need to watch me sew those on. I just want to show you what I'm going to do.
pretty. Digging here. Ooh. She even stuffed it. Wow. Very nice quality. I love the pockets. There's a lot of papers inside here. So we have the jacket. Right. Very nice buttons. Alright, and then here is the skirt. Oh. With a very nice hanger. Oh. I like this part. It's nice. Alright, well, I think that's it for the unboxing. Let me try this on now.